Imagine it's the middle of August, the kind of day where the air feels thick, where the pavement shimmers and even the shade offers no real relief. Your neighbors are inside with every window shut, their air conditioners running flat out, their electricity meters spinning like they're trying to set a record. And yet here is this one house, quiet. No humming unit bolted to the wall, no vents rattling. And somehow, impossibly, it is cool inside. Not just bearable, actually cool. This is not a hypothetical. Houses like this exist right now on multiple continents in some of the hottest climates on Earth. And the secret hiding in their walls is not some cutting-edge technology dreamed up in a lab last year. It is not a solar-powered gadget or a subscription service or anything that requires a single kilowatt of electricity. The secret is clay. Ancient, simple, abundant clay, shaped and applied using techniques that human beings figured out thousands of years ago, and then, somewhere along the way, almost entirely forgot. What these homes figured out, whether they were built in the deserts of the Middle East, the plains of West Africa, or the sun-baked villages of southern Spain, is that the Earth itself is one of the most effective cooling systems ever devised. You just have to know how to work with it. Over the next few minutes, we are going to dig into exactly how this works, where it comes from, what the science actually says, and how ordinary people today are bringing these ancient methods back to life and staying cool all summer without paying a single cent to do it. But before we get to the solution, we need to understand just how deep the problem goes. Because the way most of us live today, the way most homes are built, cooled, and powered, is not actually the default setting of human civilization. It is an experiment, a very recent, very expensive, and increasingly very fragile experiment. Here is the situation. Right now, air conditioning accounts for roughly 10% of all electricity consumed worldwide. In the United States alone, Americans spend about $29 billion every single year just to keep their homes cool. $29 billion annually. And that number is climbing. As global temperatures rise and heat waves become longer and more intense, demand for air conditioning is projected to triple by the year 2050. We are essentially running faster on a treadmill that is also speeding up. And it gets more complicated than just the bill. Air conditioning units release heat into the outdoor environment as they work. So in dense urban areas, the more people run their AC, the hotter the outside air becomes, which makes neighboring homes hotter, which makes those people run their AC even harder. Engineers actually have a name for this. They call it the urban heat island effect. The very tool we are using to escape the heat is quietly making the heat worse. Then there is the grid dependency problem. When a heat wave hits, and they are hitting harder and more often now, everyone cranks up the air conditioning at the same time. Electrical grids buckle under the load. Power outages roll through neighborhoods. And suddenly, the people who built their entire comfort strategy around a machine that requires uninterrupted electricity are sitting in dark, sweltering houses with no backup plan whatsoever. And none of this even touches on the people who simply cannot afford the system in the first place. Hundreds of millions of people around the world live in climates that are genuinely dangerous in summer heat, and they have no access to air conditioning, not because they haven't thought of it, but because the electricity infrastructure doesn't reach them, or the cost is completely out of reach. So this is the trap. A cooling solution that is expensive, grid-dependent, environmentally counterproductive, and completely inaccessible to a significant portion of the human population. A solution that, for all of its convenience, leaves us more vulnerable than we probably realize. The thing is, for most of human history, people lived in hot places without any of this. Not just survived, actually lived comfortably. And the question worth asking, the one that changes everything once you start pulling on the thread, is how. So let's pull on that thread. Because the answer doesn't start in a laboratory. It doesn't start with an engineer at a whiteboard or a patent filing from the 20th century. It starts in the dirt. Literally. It starts with clay, one of the oldest building materials on Earth, and with people who figured out something remarkable thousands of years ago, long before the concept of mechanical cooling even existed. Go back far enough, and you find it almost everywhere hot civilizations took root. Ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus Valley, Persia, the American Southwest. These weren't primitive cultures stumbling through the heat and hoping for the best. They were sophisticated societies that understood their environment and built accordingly. And clay was at the center of that understanding. In ancient Egypt, mud brick construction was standard practice for a reason that had nothing to do with aesthetics. The Nile Delta provided an almost unlimited supply of clay-rich mud, and builders packed it into thick walls that behaved in a way that modern building materials largely do not. Those walls absorbed the brutal heat of the day and released it slowly, so slowly that by the time the heat worked its way through the wall to the interior, night had already arrived and the outside air had cooled. The house was always running on a delay, and that delay was the point. In Persia, they went even further. They developed a structure called a wind catcher, a tower built above the roofline, designed to catch prevailing winds and funnel them down into clay-lined chambers below. As the air moved through those chambers, it passed over moist clay surfaces and dropped in temperature before circulating through the living spaces beneath. These weren't primitive experiments. Some of these structures are still standing today. Some are still working. In the American Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans built their cliff dwellings from adobe, a mixture of clay, sand, and organic fiber, and oriented them with a precision that used both the structure of the cliff and the thermal properties of the material to regulate temperature across seasons. Cool in summer, warm in winter. The building itself was the system. What all of these cultures understood, whether they articulated it this way or not, was that clay has a fundamentally different relationship with heat than most other materials. It doesn't just block heat, it manages heat. It absorbs it, stores it, releases it on a different schedule than the outside world. And in a hot climate, that time shifting of temperature is exactly what you need. This knowledge didn't disappear. It just got buried, under concrete, under drywall, under the assumption that because we had invented a machine to do the job, the old ways were no longer relevant. But relevant they are. Deeply, surprisingly, practically relevant. And understanding why starts with understanding the actual science of what clay does, and why that matters more right now than perhaps it ever has before. So let's talk about what's actually happening inside a clay wall. Because this isn't folklore, this isn't nostalgia dressed up as wisdom. There is real, measurable physics behind why these ancient buildings worked and why they still work today. It starts with a concept called thermal mass. Every material has some capacity to absorb heat energy before it actually gets warm to the touch. Metal has almost none. Touch a metal surface in the sun, and you know it immediately. Wood has a little more. But dense clay, especially when mixed with sand and formed into thick walls, has a remarkable ability to soak up heat without immediately transmitting it. It acts almost like a sponge for thermal energy. But here's the part that makes it genuinely useful. That absorbed heat doesn't just sit there forever. It moves slowly, very slowly, through the thickness of the wall. In a well-built adobe or rammed earth structure, it can take 6 to 8 hours for heat absorbed on the outer surface to work its way through to the interior. Think about what that means in practice. The hottest part of the day outside might be 2 in the afternoon, but the heat from that peak doesn't reach the inside of the room until 8 or 9 o'clock at night, by which point the outside air has already started cooling down again. The wall releases its stored heat outward into the cooling night, resets itself, and is ready to do the whole thing again the next morning. Engineers call this a phase shift. The ancient builders just called it home. There's a second mechanism working alongside, thermal mass, and it's just as important. Clay is hygroscopic. That means it naturally absorbs and releases moisture from the air around it. When humidity rises, clay absorbs water vapor. When conditions dry out, it releases it. This constant exchange has a cooling effect because evaporation draws energy out of the surrounding air. It's a passive, continuous, zero-energy air conditioning system built into the material itself. Now layer on top of that the effect of wall thickness. Traditional earthen structures weren't built thin. Some adobe walls are 2 feet thick or more. That mass doesn't just create the phase shift, it also acts as genuine insulation, resisting the transfer of heat in both directions. What you end up with is a system that does 3 distinct jobs simultaneously. It delays heat, it moderates humidity, and it insulates, all at once, all the time, without a single moving part, without a single watt of electricity, without a compressor, a thermostat, or a monthly bill. Modern building science didn't invent these principles. It just found words for what people already knew how to build thousands of years ago. The question was never whether the physics worked. The question was whether we'd forgotten enough to stop trusting it. And now people are remembering, not just researchers in universities, not just architects with a philosophical streak. Actual homeowners, builders, and communities around the world are taking what the ancient world figured out and putting it back to work in real buildings, on real plots of land, in climates that would otherwise demand constant mechanical cooling just to survive. In New Mexico and Arizona, adobe construction never entirely disappeared. There are neighborhoods in Santa Fe where families have lived in thick-walled earthen homes for generations, and the summer electric bills, for those who have them at all, are a fraction of what their neighbors pay in conventional houses down the street. These aren't museum pieces. They're lived-in, functional, comfortable homes that happen to be built the same way people built them 500 years ago. In Iran, architects and engineers have started revisiting the windcatcher designs of their ancestors. Modern versions are being incorporated into new construction in hot, arid cities, not as decoration, not as nostalgia, but as actual working ventilation systems that pull warm air up and out while drawing cooler air through thick earthen walls below. Some of these buildings have no mechanical cooling at all, and the people inside them are fine. Better than fine. In West Africa, compressed earth block construction is being scaled up as a cost-effective, climate-appropriate alternative to the imported concrete and metal roofing that turns simple homes into ovens. Organizations working on affordable housing in hot climates are rediscovering what the local vernacular tradition already knew, that the earth beneath your feet, processed and shaped correctly, is one of the best building materials on the planet. In Europe, particularly in places like France and Germany, earthen plasters and clay-based interior finishes are finding their way into renovation projects, applied to the inside walls of older buildings to improve humidity regulation and thermal comfort without tearing anything down or adding any new systems. Even in the United States, a growing network of natural builders, owner builders, and small contractors are constructing cob homes, rammed earth structures, and adobe builds for clients who are specifically done with the cycle of rising utility costs and mechanical dependency. None of this is fringe anymore. It's gaining ground. Because the appeal isn't just ideological, it's practical, it's financial. It's the very straightforward desire to be comfortable in your home without it costing you something every single month for the rest of your life. The ancient world built that way because they had to. We're starting to build that way again because we finally understand what we gave up. So maybe you're watching this and you're thinking, all right, I'm convinced. But where do I actually start? What does this look like in practice, in your home, right now, without hiring a team of specialists or tearing down your walls? The good news is that clay-based techniques exist on a spectrum. There's no single entry point, and there's no required level of commitment. You can go as deep as building an entire structure from the ground up, or you can start with something as simple as a single interior wall in a single room. And that second option, the small, low-stakes version, is genuinely one of the best places to begin. Clay plaster is probably the most accessible starting point for most people. It's a mixture of clay, sand, and fiber, usually chopped straw or hemp, applied directly over existing drywall, plaster, or masonry surfaces. You don't need to remove what's already there. You apply it on top in 2 or 3 thin coats, and what you get is a breathable, moisture-regulating, thermally stable surface that immediately begins doing something your painted drywall never could. The materials are not exotic. Dry clay can be purchased from pottery suppliers, natural building suppliers, or in some regions, sourced locally from the ground itself if you're willing to do a basic soil test. Sand is everywhere. Straw is available from feed stores. The tools you need are the tools you probably already own: a bucket, a drill with a mixing attachment, a trowel, and your own 2 hands. The mix ratio matters. A common starting point is roughly 1 part clay to 2 or 3 parts sand, with fiber added to help prevent cracking. But different clays behave differently, and the honest advice here is to make test panels before you commit to a full wall. Small samples. Let them dry. Watch how they shrink, how they crack, how they feel. Clay plaster rewards patience and punishes rushing. For those who want to go further, earthen floors are another achievable DIY project. A stabilized clay floor, sealed with linseed oil, is extraordinarily durable, beautiful in a quiet and unshowy way, and contributes to the overall thermal mass of a space. It's not quick work, but it is work that almost anyone with time and willingness can learn. There are also hybrid approaches, attaching clay tiles, using prefabricated rammed earth panels, or incorporating earthen elements into only the most critical thermal zones of a home, like south-facing walls or areas that absorb the most direct summer heat. The point isn't perfection. The point is starting. Because every square foot of clay surface you add is a square foot that's working for you, quietly, passively, without a switch or a bill or a compressor humming through the night. And here's where the math starts to feel almost unfair. Once the work is done, once the plaster is dry and the floor is sealed and the thermal mass is in place, the system costs you nothing to run. Not a cent. No monthly bill arriving to remind you that staying comfortable has a price. No utility company with a finger on the scale. The clay is just there, doing what clay has always done, absorbing heat when it rises and releasing it when it falls, day after day, summer after summer. People who have made this shift report something that's harder to put a number on than electricity savings, and that's the quality of the cool itself. Air conditioning produces a kind of cold that feels mechanical, because it is. It strips humidity unevenly, it cycles on and off, it fills a room with a low hum that you eventually stop noticing but never quite stop hearing. The cool that comes from thick earthen walls is different. It's still, it's even. It feels less like a machine solving a problem and more like the problem was never quite there to begin with. The upfront investment varies enormously depending on how far you go. A single feature wall of clay plaster in a living room might cost a few $100s in materials and a weekend of your time. A full rammed earth edition is a much larger commitment, but the return on that investment compounds quietly over years. Lower energy bills, reduced wear on existing HVAC systems, and in many climates, the ability to simply turn the air conditioning off for weeks at a time. There's also something worth saying about resilience. Power grids fail, heat waves are getting longer and more severe. A home that stays cooler without electricity is a home that keeps functioning when the infrastructure around it doesn't. That's not a small thing. That's the kind of security that doesn't show up in a product brochure but matters enormously when the temperature outside hits triple digits and the neighborhood goes dark. Clay doesn't promise perfection. No single material does, but it offers something rare, a solution that gets more valuable with time, that asks nothing of the grid, and that connects the way we live now to the way human beings have always known how to live, close to the earth and cooler for it. So here's what we'd love for you to do. Start small, pick one wall, mix one batch, feel the difference with your own hands before you commit to anything larger. Then share what you find, because this knowledge grows faster when people talk about it. Leave a comment, start a conversation, show someone the wall you built. The communities doing this best aren't corporations or governments. They're neighbors and builders and curious people who got tired of waiting for a better solution and decided to make one instead. If this video sparked something for you, subscribe, because there's a lot more ground to cover. Ancient techniques, modern applications, real homes, real results. The cool revolution is already underway. You might as well be part of it.